Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Talk Money Show. My name is Agnesia Agrella, and I'm the host for the Talk Money Show. This is the show where we talk about money, but I am delighted today to have a very special guest. He's living in Brighton at the moment, and his name is Csaba Toth. And today we're going to talk about uncommon sense in unusual times. So welcome to the show, Csaba, and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Well, it's a long story, but I think that sums up the topic itself and the book also, because I grew up in Hungary, and as I didn't know what to do, and I think a lot of people are like that, I just studied languages because I needed a degree. That was expected. And then as soon as I finished, I came to the UK for a summer, but it was 16 years ago and I'm still here. You never know what the future holds. So after 3 years, I went to university again, and I got a master's in international management. And that was a bit more practical because my research was about comparing the Hungarian managers with the Western Europeans. But the trick was that in Hungary, we had two generations, the one that grew up in communism and the new generation that was affected by it indirectly. And the data showed that the gap between the two generations in Hungary was much bigger than the gap between the new generation and the Western Europeans, which was really interesting because it contradicted everything that we learned about, that culture is country-specific and stable. I thought, no, that's not true. Look at the numbers. But who are you to question the academics who've been around for 30, 40 years, if you're just a student? So I forgot about it. And then I started my own company, which was a restaurant booking site. You book a table, we get the money. It was obviously a bit more exciting than that. But we started with 35 restaurants here in Brighton. And then in 1 year, we had 5,500 all over the UK. And it became a joint venture with a software company. On paper, everything made sense. We were getting the results. But on a personal level, I just couldn't work with the French CEO. Not at all. So we got to the point where we had to get out of the business. We sold the shares. It is still online. But this is when I started my research. I didn't understand how is that possible that was the exact topic of my dissertation. That department itself is #1 in the world in its category. I had years of experience, but I couldn't put that theory into practice. How's that possible? So I got certified in a lot of different things, and I wanted to understand what went wrong and how we could fix it. And the result of that is a framework called Global Disc. And this whole journey and research is in the book itself, Uncommon Sense in Unusual Times.
And what was the main thing that you actually learned? What was the main thing that you couldn't implement? So what was the main, let's call it a mistake or discovery that you made through the research? Why was it so difficult to work with that specific CEO?
I think there were a few reasons. First of all, if you look at the intercultural field, then they always talk about countries, the country of origin. And they completely miss the fact that we all belong to 15 or 20 cultural groups at the same time. That's our educational level, hobby, profession. Country of origin is one of many cultural groups we belong to. So when you talk to someone, what are the chances that the other person belongs to the same 15 or 20 cultural groups like you, even if it's within your family? It's next to zero. So every single conversation is a cross-cultural dialogue. Culture is not who we are necessarily, it's what we are used to. So just because somebody was born in Hungary or in France, it doesn't mean that they are statistically average. This is what they are used to, but they can be the complete opposite. And the problem is that, for example, if you are South African, and I know about the statistically average South African, and you are not like that, then I might come to the wrong conclusion that you're not normal. Something is wrong with you, because normal looks like this. So what is not like that is not normal, so it must be worse. Or I'm going to see you as a South African, even if you are not, because we see what we expect to see. So that was one of the main problems. And the other thing was that most of these models were created in the 60s and 70s, based on the answers from people who were working without internet, European Union, cheap flights. And there's nothing wrong with that, but they had really different challenges compared to us. But if you look at our field, there was really nothing new. New packaging, yes, but in terms of content, more than 90% of companies buy and sell solutions created that time. And they try to address the new challenges. And if you look at the statistics, clearly something is wrong. But if we overcomplicate something, people are not going to use it. So the mission is to make this topic as uncomplicated and practical as possible. Otherwise, people are not going to use it. So there is no impact.
Fantastic. So then when you started your research, what did you start your research off? Where did you start to look at to see what went wrong?
First, we have to check what common sense means. And, it's a term that we often use.
Yes.
Because, when you talk to someone, then probably you must have had the feeling that, oh my God, that person has no common sense at all. They just don't get me. But have you ever thought about the fact that they felt the same way about you, but for a different reason? Most of the time we don't. So common sense means that somebody thinks just like us. But if they have different background, different values and beliefs, then it's pretty impossible. So to me, cultural differences are clashes of common senses, which is the key to this topic. It's not a binary choice that you are right, I'm wrong. We can have a disagreement. You can be right, and I can be right as well. So if there's psychological safety and trust between us, and we have this level of cultural intelligence, then we can ask the right questions. What can you see that I cannot? What do you know that I don't? If you're able to do that, then diversity can lead to innovation. Without it, it can turn into painful liability. And this is what happens most of the time. There's no trust, so we have to protect our ego.
And that's so true. I mean, it is a topic that I'm very interested in as well, and I've always specialized in the people as well. And I just want to bring it a little bit back to the organizations, and because organizations are normally there for making money, and everything they do normally is about how do I make money? I have to be profitable. I have to be sustainable. So how do we bring the concept of the people to that output of the organization? Because there always seems to be a bit of a conflict between the people and what the organization wants. What did you find? What was the reason for that, if there is a reason?
I think there are a few reasons, definitely. So the companies know that happy people make more money. At least we got to this point.
Okay.
So they introduced employee engagement programs, for example, free lunch and maybe a spa treatment. But that's about treating the symptoms, because when you come back from the spa treatment and the free lunch, you're full and happy, but your clients still irritate you. You cannot stand your colleagues, and you really don't like your boss, then you're going to be even more pissed off. Because if you look at research, then 60 to 80% of all problems stem from strained relationships between people. 60 to 80%. It's not technology, it's not policies, it's people. And the top three reasons are clash of values, clash of personalities, and poor leadership. And all three of them stem from the same source, the lack of understanding of why people think and behave differently. So it makes sense to address all three of them at the same time by giving them the blueprint. And this is what Global Disc is about. So you can put a lot of people in a team. You employ the best of the best from all over the world, and you hope to create synergy by combining their skills. It's a good theory. But if you look at the research done by the 3 Circle partners in the US, then on average, 79% of the potential is lost in that team because of interaction gap, which is crazy. That's not really good for business, because they rely on common sense and good intention. They rely on the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated, which is a good idea from an ethical or biblical perspective, that be nice to people. But otherwise, it would imply that everybody is like us, and thank God that they are not. Statistically, at least 3 out of 4 people are significantly different to us in terms of how they handle conflicts, what they are motivated by, and what they are scared of. And that's one of the reasons. 90% of teamwork and business is interaction between people who think and behave differently. It's not optional at all. It creates a massive mindset gap that costs companies a lot. So that's one of the main reasons. The other reason is that there's a misalignment between the projected values of the company and the actual culture. Because culture is the behavior that is rewarded and punished. It's not about the big statements, the mission statements and vision statements on the company. So even in the book, I think I call it like a corporate Tinder profile. That, you know, you put something beautiful on your website, I believe it's true, I apply for a job, and then I realize, that's not like that. You talk about innovation, investing in people, and then I make a mistake and you punish me. That doesn't make sense. That's the problem when what we say and what we do are not aligned, then it creates suspicion, which is the opposite of trust. And that's where we lose a lot of potential, a lot of money.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. That's really a good way to explain it as well. So have you done any work around how people think and how that affects how they interact with each other? Because I mean, even if we come from the same culture, and even if we go to the same school, we are sort of still all individual because we had an individual experience at home. And even if we are siblings from the same family, we also have a unique experience because it was very different from everybody else. But for me, there's never been enough time given to the fact that that affects us and how we react to people. And how we then interact with anybody else. What was your findings on how do you take people from being so individualistic to then becoming part of a team?
First of all, people don't really know why they do what they do. I mean, we think we do, but I think we understand our smartphone better than our own mindset, because, you know, 95% of our actions are driven by values and beliefs and fears we are not even aware of, 95% of the time. So we can reflect on things, we can talk about things, but it doesn't matter how much you reflect on how to say good night in Russian if you don't speak Russian. It's that simple. Just like you cannot reflect on your values and needs if you don't know about them, if you're not aware of them. We can reflect on the symptoms, but that's not going to solve the problem, not the root cause of the problem. So I would start with that. Because, you know, when we have clients, then they get so passionate about, oh, now we can learn techniques and tricks and hacks on how to manage people. I said, no, wait, day one is about you. Because I promise you don't know a lot, but it's not even your fault. This shouldn't be the privilege of corporate training. This is how we should start at least high school, with this knowledge, because, you know, we need a license for pretty much everything except for our mindset, which doesn't make sense at all. And it causes a lot of trouble. And what you described about your family, it's completely true. We have different experiences because we have different values and different needs, even though we are in the same environment. And that's the key to our topic, that your personality determines how you want to behave, and your environment determines how you should, or technically how you have to behave. And there can be a really big gap between what's natural to you and what is normal around you. And that's why we have different experiences, even if we are facing the same challenges. So if you look at diversity, for example, on the surface, it looks insanely complex. I mean, how can you master 150 countries, 4 generations, and then professions, even if those numbers were correct? But if you look at beneath the surface, on a cognitive level, which is the only layer of diversity that has proven benefit, then you find that there are a limited number of values and psychological needs. The behaviors that you use, the best practices that you use to meet those needs and express those values, that's insanely complex. But there are a limited number of levers, and this is how we have to start. You know, we need a blueprint of a house. You look at it, you know exactly where you find what, but you don't see the decoration. You don't see the color of the wall, but you find what you want. And this is the point, that people are unique, but there is a blueprint of why people think and behave differently, but it starts with us. And that's why assessments are so important, because we cannot really guess. We can just discuss the symptoms.
And how do you think, because I've worked a lot in change, and it's really difficult for people to come to that self-realization and actually start looking at themselves, because there's a lot of more projection and external. It's always the other person, and nobody really wants to start from them. So how do you then get people to start looking at their own mindset and accept that they have to start looking at what happens inside, because nobody else can do that for them.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that people cannot ask for something they don't know about. And, this is not a topic that is often discussed. That's one of the problems. The other big problem is not when people don't know about something, but when they think that they do. And I think that's even more dangerous, because most people assume that they know themselves, and that's not exactly true. So if I know myself and I'm okay, then obviously you're the problem. So let's focus on that. And we try to control the external environment, but because it doesn't really happen, we get more stressed. So we want to control it even more. So it's almost like a downward spiral, instead of realizing what we can control. And technically that's three things: what we pay attention to, what meaning you attach to it, and what action you are going to take. That's all in us. And these are the only things that we can control, not the outside world. So even when we talk about, for example, inclusion, then it's a typical saying that diversity is when you are invited to a party, and inclusion is when you are asked to dance, which sounds really good. But imagine if that happens, and then you even ask me to dance with you. Then I would politely say, no, thank you. And it's not because of you, it's because of me, because there is a missing step, which is the self-inclusion. That if you have low self-esteem, which is the real pandemic right now, then, and you can read it, mental health issues, people are depressed because they compare other people's highlights to how they feel inside, and it gets worse. So that is a challenge. So imagine if you know who you are, if you know what you stand for, and let's push the boundaries, and you are okay with it, or maybe you even like yourself and you're confident, then you don't have to bully anyone to feel important. Then you don't have to hide to feel safe. And to me, that's the foundation. And if people learn that, then life becomes easier. And then they don't have to focus that much on other people. But that's the problem, like you explained it, that facing your own demons doesn't feel good. It feels horrible. It feels like slap in the face. Personal development is not meant to feel good. But that's the only sustainable solution.
Thank you for that. And then I totally agree with what you're saying. And I mean, I've seen that in my own work and my own trainings that I do around attitude and helping people to change. So I've also found that most of the time people, their self-talk and what they tell them about themselves is so negative.
Yeah.
That they cannot see the value that they can bring to the organization. And that is what's holding them back. So it's that constant of putting themselves down that is holding them back. And that is almost why they can't see how they can contribute. So they feel like they shouldn't be there in the first place. And so they're trying to convince people around them that they are good enough. But it's that almost double-edged sword of, if I think that, then I'm going to react like that. And that is where the people are so hard on themselves that that's what's holding them back. And what was your findings around how do you get people to start realizing, but they are not as bad as what they think they are?
What you described is pretty much a version of the martyr syndrome, that my self-esteem depends on how many people need me or how many people like me. And that's a really stressful place, because it's very fragile. I mean, of course, those people are really nervous and anxious, and that's not sustainable. But if I know who I am, and then it's a genuine compliment, that's a very different story. But I have to get to know myself. But I think it's just human nature that people don't do anything until it hurts enough. And that's what we do in terms of coaching, that you have to make people realize what is the benefit of working on yourself and what is the cost of not doing it. So we can amplify that pain to the point where you take action. But often people don't even know that it's an option. This is who I am. I know myself. I'm not good enough. So what? At least other people like me. And sometimes they need not even the tools. They just need an inspiring example that really, is that possible? And that's why stories are so important, because people need to believe that something is possible, because they put these limiting beliefs on themselves and they think it's true. And they don't realize that a belief just used to be a decision. It was a decision at one point, but like you said, they repeated that story so many times. They have this constant narrative that they believe it is set in stone and it's universal, and it's not.
And how do you think that actually affects people's ability to create wealth and abundance and money in their life?
You can't really have what you don't believe in. And I think that's the starting point, because you're going to sabotage yourself. Because we all have these thermostat inside, and then we just go back to it, and we have an average. So unless we raise the standards, nothing is going to change, not in the long run at least, because we are going to freak out that, oh, this is an uncertain area. I've never experienced it, so let's go back to certainty. And once we are aware of these things, then we can expand our comfort zone step by step. But that's not easy. So if you think about this thermostat, you think about your values, what you believe to be true, and what you believe to be right, then we can change them in two different ways. One is a really traumatic experience that, it makes you evaluate everything, and it's almost like an enlightenment, and you realize what's important, what's possible, what is not. But the other side of that is through repetition and intensity. And that's why the power of environment is so strong. The kind of books we read, the podcasts we listen to, the people we hang out with, because they make us believe that, yes, it's important, and we have to do it gradually. Because if something is too quick, then it might trigger the amygdala. And then we think, no, thank you, that's too much. And we shut down. But if you do it step by step, and then we believe it's true, then we can progress, but not until then.
And when you actually sold your first company, or your second company, your first company, it was your first company, wasn't it? Yes, the hotel room one. When you sold that, when you started to do your research, did you have to change your own thinking and your own beliefs, or did you realize that what you wanted to do was okay and you were comfortable with that?
I wasn't comfortable at all. I mean, it doesn't matter how smart we are, when it's about us and it's happening to us, it's really difficult to see the world objectively. Of course, it was painful, it was horrible. And then first, you're blaming and criticizing other people instead of taking responsibility. But then once you calm down and you try to look at it objectively, then you can make progress, but not until then. And you need some empowering beliefs as well. For example, that everything happens for us. So we don't know why something happens, but there is a lesson in it. And we're going to get the same lesson until we learn that lesson. So in terms of coaching, I like talking about leveling up, which comes from the gaming industry, that, you play a video game, you have lots of challenges, you learn new skills, and at the end you have to destroy that monster. And if you don't, you start over. If you do, you level up. And most people run around on the same level. And then they blame other people that, oh, I'm in the same relationship. Oh, this person is so bad. Oh, it's the same job. Well, think about why. What is the common denominator? Is that you or something else? But that, again, that doesn't feel good. So we have to take responsibility. And taking responsibility doesn't mean that we blame anyone or ourselves. It just means that instead of positive and negative thinking, we focus on accurate thinking, which is quite difficult, especially when it's emotionally charged.
Yes, I was just going to ask you, do you have sort of any techniques that you used to level up? Because I think that level up is a lot easier said than done.
Oh, yes, definitely. But then I just think about the most horrible poison, which is regret, technically. And this is what I don't want. And it's very important, the kind of language that we use, because when you talk about transformation and changing people and yourself, then it sounds really negative and it sounds very powerful, but nobody likes that. When somebody tells you to change or transform, then there is a hidden message there that you're not good enough.
Yes.
And nobody likes that. And I said, you know what, leave me alone. even when you have to do it to yourself. But once you realize that we have this paradox of change, that, you know, you try to protect the status quo, you try to protect your comfort zone, and you completely dismiss the fact that the world is changing around you. So it's changing, the gap is getting bigger until you get to breaking point. And then you have no option. You break, or you just level up and you have to do it. So ultimately, you're endangering the very thing that you try to protect, which is an interesting concept. But once you realize that if you gradually change or gradually upgrade, so it's you, but an even better version, then you're protecting everything. It's about updating. You know, when we are growing up, we don't want to stay the same. It's natural. But sometimes people think that they deny their heritage, that it's something disrespectful. It's not realizing that if you really love something, then you look after it. And if the world is changing, we have to be adaptable. It doesn't mean that we deny anything. But if you look at, for example, the current situation, the pandemic, there's so much uncertainty around us that people are craving certainty, and it's really difficult to find it. If they don't know themselves, everything else is crumbling around them. What else is left? The national identity, and we can see why that is rising now, that we can hug the flag, we can do something about that. But we are lacking this self-inclusion, we are lacking the right mindset, lacking the kind of confidence and self-awareness and the kind of belief that whatever happens, we can deal with it. It doesn't mean that we know all the answers. It just means that whatever happens, probably we can manage.
So do you think then that to be successful in business and to really create the wealth that people want, do they have to start off with the money side, or do they start off with the individual? So do they have to start with themselves, or do they have to start with the organization?
I think they have to start with themselves. And for example, when I coach coaches, then this is a typical conversation, because every time that you go on the internet, then you can find different companies telling you how to make more money, how to charge more. But I've never seen one where they say, I show you how to give more value. I've never seen that. It's all about packages. So if you focus on the money, I don't think that's the right thing to do. And sometimes people focus on the tools and solutions they have. Again, people are not interested in that. They're interested in the problem that you solve. But what makes you credible? I believe that the best solutions are born out of frustration and pain. And this is what happened to me. I went through a rough period. It was horrible. But then I found solutions. And I realized that a lot of people have the same problem. They just want to make sense of why people think and behave differently. If you look at it, most of the opportunities, time and energy, are lost for two reasons. One is friction with people who think and behave differently. And the other one is friction with yourself, which is pretty much self-sabotage. This is what we talked about. We think we want something, but deep inside you don't believe it, so you're going to sabotage yourself. And you're back to your normal level. So I would say that first we have to focus on the problem, something that we already solved, a challenge that we overcame, because that makes us credible. And this is what clients pay for. They don't pay for the tools. They pay for the fact that you can save them years of failures and frustration. That's what they pay for. They want to know that you had the same problem, you managed to overcome it, and you're there to help them probably minimize that period, or minimize the damage, or even make the most of that situation. That's the main difference. And then once you have that, you can focus on building a business rather than working on your job. Because you can make a lot of money when you have a job, even if you're independent and freelance. But I'm focusing on building a business, which is very different. A business works without you. A job doesn't. And maybe it takes longer to build a business, but it has much better and bigger impact than just a normal job. And this is what I noticed when I started working with coaches, that they're really good at what they do. They're really smart people, but most of them are not really entrepreneurs. They don't think like a business person. They want enough money to get by, or they want to feel that they are making a difference, and that's their full-time job. But building a business requires a very different mindset.
And what is that mindset? What is the difference between a businessman and an employee?
I mean, definitely is about how to lead yourself. To me, that's number one. And this is what a lot of people had to experience right now when they had to work from home. Suddenly, they had a lot of time with themselves, managing themselves, or even being with the family. And then that was a disaster, because it's much easier to be distracted by your boss or other employees. And for example, if you're an employee and then a meeting is canceled, then yes, that's time off, excellent. If you're an entrepreneur, then you know that you can do something else. That's an added bonus. It's not a time off. It's a different way of thinking. And when you're an employee, and especially if you're not really engaged, then it's about doing the bare minimum so you don't get sacked. And you also don't get too much money. You get enough, so you stay. It's not a really good business deal. But when you are an entrepreneur and you're building a business, then it's about creating passive revenue streams. And it's about creating synergies. And this is how I managed to build the first business. First, we started with 35 restaurants, and then we had a few more. And then after that, I approached Open Table. And with one contract, we got 3,500 restaurants. So that was a win-win situation. So if you want to build a business, it's not me. I want to be the guru. I take a selfie, I put it on LinkedIn. No, it's about seeing how we can create synergy with other people, how we can add more value. Because what if what you have and what I have we combine? Then we create a package that is just so powerful that it's a no-brainer to the clients, instead of knocking on the same door. That's the main difference to me.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. And then just, I want to just bring it back from the employee's point of view as well, because so often they feel that they are not allowed to be creative because the boss wants it done in a certain way. And if it's not done their way, it's not good enough.
Yeah.
So how do we overcome that, where there's that almost direction of you have to do it this way? So in a certain way, the organization or the company is taking away the employees' creativity.
And that's why they are losing out on a lot of opportunities and money. I mean, that's exactly what the Three Circles Partners research proved, that if you lose 79% of the potential because of interaction gap, how much money do you leave on the table? How much have you lost in the last month or last 12 months? How much are you going to lose in the next 12 months? And that's down to the leadership, because you have to understand that often the quiet people have the best ideas. The loud ones are not always right. How can you bring out the best in your team? There was an interesting research by the Inc. magazine. They asked the employees about the top 3 priorities of a company. So it's nothing magical, not even about the mission statements, just what are the top 3 priorities of the company that you work for? And they expected 64% of the people to know that. I mean, it's not extreme. The actual number was 2%. 2% of the employees knew the top 3 priorities. Now imagine, how can they be creative? They don't even know what's happening. What the reason is, I'm not sure, if nobody's sharing or they're not interested. But how can you tap into that wealth of expertise and experience? Because even just one idea could change everything. But if they don't know what the big picture is, it's never going to happen. They just do what they are told. So everybody's reading the same book, but they are on, they're on different pages. It's not, they have a vision of probably the goal or the reality, or just want to get by. They know that they have to make more money next month and they have to spend less. But why they do it, nobody knows. So it's difficult. So I would start with leadership. That's why we focus always on senior leadership, because corporate culture is the behavior and that you reward and you punish. And usually that is the reflection of the senior leaders' personal preferences, because they believe it to be true and right. So that's what they reinforce. But that's not necessarily good. The other problem is when we talk about homophilic diversity, that we employ people who are like us. So we agree, even if they look different, they think the same way. We like and trust people like us, and that's the problem. Imagine that you have a meeting especially when we talk about, complex jobs. You have a meeting and then you have 10 people in the boardroom. Everybody agrees with you, so it feels fantastic and feels right. It doesn't make it true. That means that as a team, you have the same blind spot as you as an individual. And that's dangerous.
And yes, I agree with you. And so I just want to ask then, if we have got people that don't agree with me, and especially in a work environment, how do you overcome when there's a stalemate, when that group of people or that team of people cannot make a decision because they cannot agree on a way forward?
I think the question is if somebody wants to be right or they want the results. That's a big difference.
Great.
So we can talk about the different levels of disagreement, because a disagreement means that we have different perspectives based on our experience or anything like values and beliefs. But it escalates to a conflict when we stop talking to each other. And that's when I hear that all conflicts are so powerful and constructive. No, they're not. Because if you don't talk to each other, then how's that constructive? A disagreement, yes, especially if there's psychological safety. But that's what people need to understand, that individual performance should also depend on the performance of the group. So if you have this stalemate and we don't agree, we still have to do something because everybody is going to lose out. And then you also put more pressure on those people because of the group, because it affects everyone. So somebody is going to make a decision, but ultimately they should understand that there is a bigger picture. They should see the future. They should know the goals, the top priorities, because you cannot be successful alone if the group is not successful. So it's not which one should I choose. No, you need both, unfortunately.
Fantastic. And I think that's a great way to sort of end our conversation today, because I think that was the real message as well. Because when we come to that stage for ourselves, if we want to make money, we have to look at ourselves and come to an agreement of what is my higher purpose? Where do I want to go? What's the bigger picture? And that then comes down all the way to how we deal with people, how we interact. So in closing, what would you like to leave the audience with? What message would you like to leave them with?
The key message is that relying on common sense and good intention can majestically backfire. That's probably one of the most expensive piece of advice I had from my mom. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Yes, be nice, but otherwise people can be very different. And diversity feels good until somebody disagrees with you. After that, not so much. But that's the potential, because they can reduce your blind spot. They can give you the kind of insight that you never thought about. And that's how we can tap into that kind of creativity and expertise. And that's how we can multiply the value that we bring as a team. And also, we should learn from other people's mistakes. So if they can see something that I cannot, they know something that I don't, it makes sense to listen to them. And to be honest, this is what I always do. I listen to everyone, but I do what I want. But I do listen because there might be something in it, even if it doesn't feel good. And sometimes it doesn't.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and your research. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Thank you everybody for listening. And I'll see you next time.